I'm Vicky from So Fabulous Fabrics. Thank you for joining me for my latest tutorial. Today we're going to make the Spring Bloom Star mini quilt, and you can see it hanging on the wall just behind me, so it's just here. I have used fabrics from Lewis and Irene to make this mini quilt. Now it comprises of foundation paper piecing, which is these pieces just here, which is the feathered part of the star, and strip piecing, which is the lone star pieces, which is the diamonds just here. So I hope you enjoy this video. Let's get sewing. Here are the tools that we're going to need for this project. Some of them will be optional, some of them you may not have, and that's absolutely fine, but you might find something else you could use instead. So let's just run through what I have here. So first of all, I have a seam roller. I use this a lot in my patchwork. It's a great tool to have by your side when you need to press seams open or to one side. It saves having the iron on all the time, so you can initially just use your seam roller and then press later on with your iron. I've also got a tailor's clapper. This I use along with my iron, so if I'm going to press as I go, or when I come to press at the end, I will put this on top. It absorbs the heat and it will help to flatten your seams down. So I really love my tailor's clapper. I've got an unpicker. We don't like using them really, but they're quite an essential part of your sewing kit, so I have an unpicker. Because we are going to be doing some foundation paper piecing, I've also got some tweezers to help me take the paper off the back of the fabric. I've got my pin cushion and some clips, because you'll definitely need both of those. I've got a glue pen. One of the optional items I have got is a hump jumper. Because there will be a lot of seams in this project, some parts of your sewing will be overlapping and you will get quite thick parts of the seam. So you may need something just to help you jump over that seam when you're sewing. You could also use some layers of paper or card, which I've done before as well, and just pop it behind your foot when you're sewing. It just helps to lift it slightly, lift the foot slightly, just to get over those thicker parts of the seam. I have also got a rotary cutter and an old blade for cutting the paper for when we do the foundation paper piecing. I've got fabric scissors, and I have got a fabric marker pen. I've got some paper scissors, the rotary cutter for the fabric, the quilter's ruler. I've also got a piece of plastic, or if you've got some stiff card, you could use that as well. That is useful for your foundation paper piecing. Everything I've got here, as you can see, is laid on top of my pressing mat, and I also have an iron. I've also got what's called a tailor's awl. It's primarily used for making holes in fabric, but because it's got quite a long piece here, I use it to steady the fabric under the needles. So if I need to keep the fabric in place when it's on top of each other, I just use this to steady it rather than my fingers, just to guide it when it's going under the machine foot. And I've also got some starch, which I'll just have to reach over and get, as I forgot to put it with my tools. I have got some Mary Ellen's Best Press. there's lots of different starch on the market, but this is the one that I've got. This is scent free as well. You will need something like that for when we're going to construct the diamonds, because all of those pieces are cut on the bias of the fabric. They will have a habit of stretching. So I will show you as we start what I'm going to do with the starch and how I'm going to use it. So you don't need to worry about that for the moment. So let's get sewing. The first part of the pattern we're going to make is the Lone Star diamonds, which are these ones here. So we're going to be using 3 different fabrics for those. So I've got my greeny colour, and then my duck egg blue, and my sort of peachy pink colour to do these. And how we're going to do this is we're going to cut strips from those 3 fabrics according to the measurements on the pattern. And also on the pattern it will tell you how many strips of each you need to do. So using your rotary cutter and your quilting ruler, we will do those. I have ironed my pieces of fabric first because you want them without any creases in. Okay, so I will get those cut and then we'll come back and we'll have a look at those. Once you have cut your strip sets, the next thing we need to do is to put them together in sets of 3 to make up the diamonds that form the Lone Star part of the block. So you can either look on the pattern and it will tell you in which order to stitch your pieces of fabric together, or have a look on the picture that's on the front of the pattern. So we're going to start with the roses one for our first row, and I'm going to label each set of 3 as I go, and I'm going to be doing 2 lots of each set, and they're going to be labelled the same. So I'm going to be doing 2 bundles of strip 1, 2 of strip 2, and 2 of strip 3. So we're starting with strip 1. So we need one of the roses, and we need one of the flowers, and another one of the roses. So I've put those in order that they need to be stitched together, and I'm just going to pop a piece of paper on there saying strip 1 and just pop a clip on there, and then I will do the same again. And that's another one of strip 1. What we're going to do is we're going to make 2 strip sets of each combination. You may find that that is more than what you actually need, but in case you do any cutting mistakes, you've got it already stitched together, and then you can just cut more diamond shapes. So the next one is the little star flower, and then the green one. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong way here. Yeah, star flower, the green one, and a star flower. So that's our next strip set, which is strip set 2. And we'll do a second bundle of those ones. Again, strip set 2. And then for strip set 3, you've got the peach coloured roses, then the star flower, and then the green flowery one. So that's going to go on the top, then that one, and then your green one. So that's strip set 3. And then the same again. So once you have all of your strips together, all bundled together, you then need to sew each set of 3 with a scant 1/4 inch. So I'm going to go to the machine and do those, and then once we've stitched them together, we'll be then ready to cut the diamond shapes. Once you have stitched all your strips together, then you need to iron your seams in one direction. So I've got mine all going downwards, and to do that I first of all use my seam roller just to run it along to get them nice and even, and then I go over the top with the iron on the back and on the front. And then we are ready to spray with some starch. You don't have to use starch if you don't want to, but I am using it for my project because of the fabrics being cut on the bias when they cut into diamond shapes. So I have got my Mary Ellen's Best Press, and I'm just going to spray some on the front, and then with a medium heat iron I'm just going to place that on the top and just give the fabric a bit of a press. Be careful you don't move the iron around too much because you could distort the fabric. A little spray on the end. Then I am putting my little bits of paper back on the end so as I know which strip is which. And there we have all of the strips sewn together and pressed and sprayed with starch and pressed again. We are now ready to cut our strips. So first of all, you will need to cut the end off so as you've got a diagonal line. So finding the 45-degree angle on your ruler, you need to place that along the bottom edge of your fabric, and then this line here, which is also a 45-degree angle, place that on the left hand side of your fabric strip. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to cut straight up here with the rotary cutter. So we have got 8 diamonds to make for our Lone Star part of the pattern. So we're going to need 8 strips cut all together. So again, place your 45-degree angle on the bottom of your bottom strip, and finding the point for the measurement that is on the pattern, you need to pop that line onto the side edge of your diagonal. So keeping your 45 degree angle line still along the bottom here. So in this case we are doing 1 3/4. So we've got 1 3/4 inches, so it's on that 1 3/4 inch line just there and along the bottom on the 45 degree angle. So we will then just cut, and you're going to need 8 of these all together. So just follow the same procedure every time, matching your lines and dots on your ruler to the bottom edge and the left hand side edge. There we have our 8 strips cut, and I'm just going to pop the little label on there so as I know which one I've done and which one's first. And then we're going to do exactly the same with the other strip sets. Once you have cut all your strip sets, we're then ready to join them together to make the Lone Star diamond shape just here. So you're going to need one of each strip. I'll just remove those. Ooh. And then the diamond shape will be assembled like this. So that's your first one, and then your second, and then your third. So that's how it will be once you stitch them together. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to make some markings on the fabric so as we can easily join where these seams are, so they will go together nicely. So that's the top, that's the bottom. So on the bottom one, I'm going to just mark some lines at the 1/4 inch mark just across where the seam is. So this one's on the right side of the fabric. And then this one's going to be laid on top like that. So we'll do the same with this one, but on the reverse of the fabric. To match the seams when we're sewing the pieces together, we're going to pop some pins through where the mark crosses the stitching line. So I'm just going to bring this a little bit closer. You need to pop your pin on the marked line and where it joins the stitching line, and try and get it through as straight as you can. And then on the other piece that you're going to be stitching it to, you need to do exactly the same. This is why you've marked one piece on the front and one piece on the back. So again, just finding where that drawn line is, popping the pin in right on the edge of the seam, and then popping the two fabrics together, just giving the pin a little wiggle just to get it straight. And then we're just going to pin those bits of fabric together. Hopefully you can see that okay on camera. So I'm going to do exactly the same with the other one. I'm going to do it a bit lower because it's a bit more difficult closer to the camera. So pop the pin through on the stitching line, find where you've marked it on the fabric underneath, pop the pin in on that seam, and again just give the fabrics a little bit of a wiggle, making sure that they are together at the top, and then just pop your pin in. And then we're ready to stitch the two pieces together. Now I'm going to still use a scant 1/4 inch, although I've marked these on the 1/4 inch line. I'm going to use a scant 1/4 inch stitching line. That is because I want to make sure that the finished piece is the correct size when all the pieces have been put together. So I will go and get that stitched, and then we've got another one to stitch on here as well, but we'll have a look at this one first. Here are my first two pieces stitched together. So we're just going to open that out. I'm just going to grab my seam roller, and you can see that the joins, the seam lines are joining together there in the middle. So that's what you're looking for. So I'm going to just press my seams to one side. Just do it with the roller for now, and I'll press them later with the iron. So that's the first part of your diamond stitched together. And then you're going to want strip set number 3, which is going to sit on the bottom of there. And we're going to do exactly the same as we did at the beginning. So we're going to mark our 1/4 inch on the top of this one. Just across the seam lines just there. And then we're going to do this one on the back, so it's be along this side on the reverse of the fabric. And again, we are going to use our pins. So popping the pin through that first line and on the stitching line, and then again through the other piece. Just give that a little wiggle to make sure it's straight, and then just pop your pin through the fabric. And then we're going to do the same with the other one. And then we're ready to stitch a 1/4 inch seam just along here. There is my first Lone Star diamond made. So you can see that the seams are matching in these corners here. They're looking pretty good. And at the moment I've just pressed the seams to one side using my seam roller. So we've now got 7 more of these to make before we do the foundation paper piecing. For the background of your star, you'll need your 1/2 metre of fabric. So I've got this lovely pinky shade on a creamy background. It's got little hearts and little flowers on it. And I have trimmed around the edges just to make them straight, and I've also cut the selvage edge off the fabric as well. I've got a square ruler, so that's what I'm going to use to cut the squares for the background. When you have cut your squares of fabric for the background, you then need to cut them in half across the diagonal. So then you will have 8 pieces of each size. We are now moving on to the foundation paper pieced part of this project. So foundation paper pieced is abbreviated to FPP on a lot of patterns, and it is to do with stitching paper onto the reverse of fabric to make intricate and gorgeous patterns. My FPP for this pattern is quite simple. So this is what the pattern pieces look like. So you have got 4 pieces to a sheet, and I've got A and B and C and D. So A and B go together and C and D go together, and you should have printed off 4 copies of this pattern. So first of all, what we need to do is cut them out. I like to cut mine out with a small margin around the shapes. So I will just show you what I mean. I'll just do one. So there's a nice little margin here, so I'll leave that margin on there, and then I'm just going to cut around. So where the this comes into like a bit of a diamond, I'm just going to cut straight across with the margin, because you don't need to cut that bit at this moment. So you'll cut all of the pieces out with that margin. I've cut B, but it doesn't really matter which one you start with. And then I have got my diamond shape here that I've already done, and I've already done most of these FPP pieces, but just to show you how it's going to look, just move all my stuff out of the way. So the foundation paper pieces, which is quite a mouthful actually, are going to be around the top here. So you've got the one piece with the diamond and the one piece without. So when we come to stitch them on, which I will do on video later on, we're going to stitch the smaller piece on first on the right hand side. So the green fabric will be on the diamond that you've already stitched, and then the longer piece will come onto the opposite side and will be stitched all the way up here to join it all together. So that's how it will look roughly when it's done. Now you can see on mine I have actually trimmed them already. So I've trimmed onto this trimming line just here. This is the stitching line, the solid line, and then the little dash line is where you will trim the paper and the fabric away. Now I have an old rotary cutter with an old blade in it, which I use for cutting through the paper and the fabric. It works well enough for cutting the fabric as well, but I wouldn't use this one for my normal cutting. So that's how it will look once it's all trimmed, and you can see that all the pieces sit very nicely on that paper, and then we remove the paper. But as we go through this tutorial, I will show you how to do that as well. I have my piece of plastic template ready to fold back the paper, and I have my fabrics which I'm using for the feathered part of this star. Let's just have a look at the machine foot that I'm using to do the FPP. I have got a Janome Memory Craft sewing machine, and this is foot F, which, as you can see, has a clear bit at the front here with a little red arrow shape on this piece of plastic just here. So when I start using this, I can line up the stitching lines on the FPP paper with this little red arrow, and I can also then see how I'm stitching when I'm doing these. So that's what I'm going to be using. You might have something similar, or you can just use your ordinary sewing foot that comes with your machine. I have 2 of my FPP templates ready to start. I've also got my 2 fabrics that we're using for these. So I've got the background fabric, and I've cut out 6 squares of approximately 3 by 3 inches. And I have done the same with the green, but I've also cut out a piece which is 3 by 4 inches, which will be for the diamond just at the top here. So I'm going to start with C1, and using my little bit of plastic, I'm going to pop that onto, well, just below that solid line that goes from C1 to C2, and I'm just going to press the paper over and just crease it. And then, because it's the darker colour, we know that that's going to be the green that we're going to start with. So I'll take my first piece of fabric, and I'm going to lay it, you need to turn your paper over first, I'm going to lay it wrong side down on the wrong side of the paper. And what you need to do is you need to make sure that you have got a 1/4 inch overhang over that crease that you just put in the paper, and the fabric needs to cover all of this triangle shape. So I'm going to put a bit of glue in the center of the triangle, which I can just about see through the paper, and then I'm going to place the fabric on the top and just turn it over just to make sure that you've got everywhere covered. If you wanted to, you could just move that a bit further up to the edge of the fabric. Like that. And then we're ready to place the pink and cream bit right sides together on the back. So I'll just flip that open again so you can hopefully see. So once we've stitched along this solid line, you flip that piece of fabric over and it will cover C2, including the seam allowance. So we then go to the sewing machine, and you need to set your machine at a stitch length of 1.5. This is so when you tear the paper away at the end, it will come away easily. And then just flip that open and pop it underneath your foot. Put the needle down into the paper, do a couple of back stitches, and then stitch to the end of that first solid line. A couple of stitches on the end and back stitch again into the triangular shape. Okay, so now we're going to flip the fabric across and just press it. I press it down with my fingers first and then just go over it with the roller. So then we turn that over, and then you need to find the next solid line, which is going to be this one, that's C2 to C3, and just again put a crease in the paper shy of the solid line, so you actually get it onto that solid line. Pull your paper over. It will bring the fabric that you've just stitched over with it, but just gently pull that away. It's not going to pull the stitches out of the fabric, it will just pull them out of the paper, and that's what you want, so that's absolutely fine. So we'll put a crease in there. With this, I'm now going to cut my seam allowance, because this is where we're going to be stitching on. So I don't need all of this bulk here. So I'm just going to trim that piece off. And then we find the next square of green, because we're looking for the colour that's the darker one. So lay that flat, lay your FPP piece on top. Just make sure that you are covering, it's not brilliant for light, but this is the stitching line when we come to stitch them together, and this is the cutting line. So this is your seam here, so you need to make sure that this cutting line is within the fabric on both sides. So I can just see that the green is underneath this line here. So we will flip that back, and then we will stitch on top of that line. Again, needle in on the point where the two lines meet, a couple of back stitches, then stitch along the line to this point here, into this seam allowance, a couple of stitches, and then back stitch a couple of stitches, and just make sure that you do finish your stitching within this area here. Hopefully you can see where I've back stitched at the top here, and then I've gone into this seam allowance here and then back stitched back into this area just here. Then we will press that piece open. Then flipping it back to the right side, get your plastic piece again, and we're going to fold back on the line that is between C3 and C4. I'm going to trim these edges off again, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we'll just trim that excess fabric away. It's much easier to do it that way if you can, because it saves all the bulk of the fabric, and also you could get a little bit confused as to where you're supposed to be sewing. So if you've actually made that seam allowance first of all, you'll know which bit you're going to be stitching onto next. So we want the creamy coloured one, so the lighter coloured shade for C4. And again, pop that underneath, and just making sure that the two, so it would be this line here and this line just here, are within that creamy coloured fabric that is at the back. You don't want it sticking off, because if you do that, then it won't cover the triangle that's underneath this paper. So I'll transfer that to the sewing machine. So we've now come to the point where the diamond shape is. So you'll need your bigger piece of fabric for this. So just as you have been doing, press the paper away on that line that's joining the two shapes together. Just press that down. And again, just trim the fabric away. So with this piece, you need to work out which way you're going to put it, because it's 3 by 4. You just need to see which is the best way of doing it, because what you need to do is you need to cover the whole of this area. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm just going to lay that on top with the, and I know it's very difficult to see, with this, with this cutting line here, way over to the left of the fabric underneath. It's not, hasn't gone over too much. Well, it has gone over, but it's not by too much. And then this side, we may just have fitted it in because we've allowed this extra margin around the template. But just a little tip or trick for you. How I'm going to check this is I'm just going to fold this open, pick the fabric and the template and fabric that you've stitched on up in your hands, pop that diamond shape to the back so you've just got the line that's just showing at the top here. Then if you flip this over, you'll be able to see whether that piece of fabric you've got is going to cover this shape you have here. And it looks like it is. And you've got plenty of room around where we left a margin anyway, so it should be absolutely fine. So then very carefully undo it. Just make sure that your fabrics are together. And then stitch it as before. And then fold that open. And all your pieces of paper will now be, or should I say all your pieces of fabric will now be stitched onto your paper, and it's ready then to be trimmed. I'm going to do the second part on camera, but I'm not going to talk through this. I'm just going to show you what to do. pieces that I've just stitched the fabric onto, and we're now ready to trim the excess paper away. So you're going to need your ruler and your old blade in your rotary cutter. I'll do this one first of all. So you're going to be cutting along the dotted line here. Don't cut along the solid line. If you do that, then you haven't got a seam allowance and you'd have to make the piece again. When you get to the point at the end, cut it the shape that it is, because that will help you when you're fitting your pieces together later on. That will help to place them in the correct place. Now you have finished all of your FPP parts of the pattern, you're ready to stitch them on to the Lone Star diamonds. So you will need one of each size of the FPP, and we're going to start with the shorter one, and this needs to be stitched on with the green next to the diamond shape. So first of all, you will need to mark your 1/4 inch across the seam line on your diamond, and then we're going to find these points and place them so as they match with the points on the diamond. Now I like to keep my papers on, just makes it a bit more stable, but if you want to take yours off before stitching them on, then you can do that. You will just need your tweezers to be able to pull it away from the stitching. So you're also going to need some pins, and what we're going to do first of all is pop a pin through that point where the lines meet. And then on your pattern, we're going to on your diamond, we're going to pop that pin through the line next to where the seam line is on that diamond shape. Again, like we have done before, just wiggle it a little bit just to make sure it's straight when it comes through the other side. And then I'm going to pin these two together. Now, if you've taken the paper off, obviously it's exactly the same way, but you will need to mark your fabric once you've taken the paper off. And then we'll do the other one. So the end where the little sort of triangle shape has been cut should sit on the edge of the lower part of the diamond. So hopefully you can just see, so that's the straight edge there, and that will sit against this straight edge here. And you could pop some more pins in if you want to, or just put a clip on it. And then the other end, you've got the little overlap of the diamond shape there. If you've kept the papers in, obviously you do have a 1/4 inch stitching line here, but I am going to use a scant 1/4 inch because then that will preserve the points of the FPP when it's opened up and pressed. So I will get this one stitched on, and then we'll take a look, and then we'll move on to stitching the longer piece on. Then press your FPP fabrics open. And I'm now going to mark the 3 seams with a 1/4 inch. Then, as we did with the other side, we're just going to pin that piece on. And there you can see your last piece of fabric, which is the green diamond, is going to sit on that corner of the fabric underneath. And I'm going to just pop a clip on that, and then that's ready to stitch on. Now I've stitched that piece on, I'm just ready to press that open. The seam is going to go into the middle of the diamond. You can probably see I've already taken off the papers off the smaller one that I already put on, but we will just press this one. When I've finished all of these diamond shapes, I will press each of them with the iron and with my tailor's clapper, just to make sure that these bulky bits in the middle here are flattened as much as possible. So that's how it's going to look when you're finished, and then we just need to take the papers off from the back. So just using your tweezers, just pull them off, and that will be absolutely fine. So I'm going to get the other 7 of my diamonds completed, and then we'll come back and we'll give them a press. There are my diamonds all finished. I've pressed them with the iron, and I've used my tailor's clapper just to press them down. You've got some quite lumpy bits in places, so if you have got something that you can use, then I would advise doing that. My seams are pressed to the middle of the diamond, so when you've put the smaller one on, first of all, press that seam into the middle, and then your longer one do exactly the same. So you should have 8 of those in total. Now we're ready to put the background fabrics on. So you should have all of your background fabrics cut in half across the diagonal. So you've got your large pieces and your smaller pieces. On the smaller pieces, I have marked on the back of them a little pen mark just in the middle of the diagonal cut. So I've just folded it in half, just put a crease in it, and then put a little pen mark. That's so we can get it in the right place on the diamond. These are the triangles that I have stitched on to this diamond shape just here. So the next ones we're going to do with our next diamond, which will be this one, is to stitch a large one on this side and the smaller triangle on this side. So you want to do the smaller triangle first of all. So finding the middle of this side here, just fold it in half, and where you've got those two shapes or edges just there, you want to place that top one just on this lower straight edge here, and then just pop a crease in the middle, and then you can just pop a mark or leave it as the crease. It's entirely up to you, but I like to put a mark so as I know where to add this piece on top. So match your two pen marks, and then I'm going to pop a pin in there, and a pin just either side just to secure it before I start sewing. And then, as I say, we're going to stitch these on with a scant 1/4 inch. I've completed my second bit of this wall hanging, so you can now see the two pieces which will be sewn together. So I'm now going to move on and do the other 6 in exactly the same way, and either follow the pattern or you've got your layout on the front of the pattern as to which way the triangular pieces are stitched on. Now we are ready to stitch all of our pieces together. So I'm going to stitch mine in pairs, and what we need to do is we need to draw some lines across the seam lines on both pieces. So one set on the front of the fabrics and one set on the reverse. And I've just missed one there, so I'm just going to do that one. So you want to make sure that your lines are about 1/4 inch. So starting with this top one here, just going to poke a pin through and through the one underneath, and just make sure that your pieces of fabric are pretty straight, and give the pin a little bit of a wiggle just to make sure it's through both pieces, hopefully in a straight line, and pin that together. And then you'll just go along and do all of the others. And I'm also going to put some pins in this side just to keep it secure, and then I'm going to stitch it together with a scant 1/4 inch. The next step is to stitch together the squares that you have just made. So I have already stitched 2 together. I haven't pressed the seam as yet, but I'm going to press the seam in the middle open like we did before. Then I'm going to stitch the other 2 together in the same way, and then you've got just 2 pieces to stitch along this middle line. So I'm going to get all of that done, and then we'll come back and we'll look at the finished piece. I have my mini quilt all finished and all pieced together. So the next step is to get it quilted. So I'm going to make a quilt sandwich first of all, and then I'm going to quilt it on the sewing machine. We're now ready to quilt our mini quilt. So I have got my backing and my batting and my quilt top. I'm basting the 3 layers together with some curved safety pins. They're quite easy to push through because of the curve. And I'm going to start sewing the quilting from the middle. So I'm going to do around the green star in the middle, and then I'm going to go to this line here, and then this one here around the feathered part, and then hopefully you can see I've drawn some lines in this corner here, which I'm also going to stitch as part of the quilting, and I'm going to do the same in the triangle areas as well. So I've used my friction pen, which I have tested on the background fabric to make sure it disappears okay. So that's that. And then I've got some Gutermann thread here, which is, I think it's sulky, but I'm not quite sure. But that is shade 4025. So that's what I'm using for my quilting. And I've used my square ruler to do these lines in the corners, and they're 1.5 inches apart. So I'm going to carry on and do the rest, and I'm also going to do the binding, which I've already prepared. Thanks for watching this video tutorial.